Hey, Raul. I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about AI being game changing. That's what the media has, right? That AI is game changing. But you emphasize that true business transformation comes from AI reliability. Can you describe what separates AI implementations that deliver real AI reliability from those that fall short?
Yeah. So first of all, thanks, Michelle, for for this conversation today. Um, yeah, would love to talk about like an aspect, because there's so much cutting edge stuff going on with AI, and sometimes we lose track of the fact that hey, like how do we make this provide value in the real business context, and how do we trust the outcomes and so on and so forth, right? So reliability is a big part of uh, making AI relevant, sticky, and trusted in the enterprise context. And then when I look at what reliable AI means, I have like roughly five pillars, right, of what that entails. uh, the first one is explainability. Like you don't want AI to be a black box. Like you give it some input and you get some output, and you have no idea why you got the output you got. So explainability, transparency around the logic behind the response you got or the outcomes you got is very important. Because imagine you're using AI in credit risk modeling, and you deny credit to someone, um, and you're unable to explain why. That just, we have fair lending rules and things like that, and it just becomes like something that's not that won't stand, right, the scrutiny of a large enterprise. So the explainability of the results, the explainability of the responses is very, very important. The transparency of why you got the result you got. So to me, that's like the first pillar of uh, what reliable AI stands for, right? The second, which is more relevant in the world of LLMs, is what I call like grounding. So you can ask, open LLMs questions, right? Like Anthropic or a OpenAI chatbot, and you'll get very generic answers, and that's fine from a consumer standpoint. But when you're an enterprise, there's a lot of enterprise context that is relevant to your answer, right? And so, how do you make the answer more relevant to the context of your enterprise? Um, One simple example is, let's say you ask a question to a general LLM. Um, Tell me a little bit about systems, and or tell me a little bit about platforms, and that general LLM might synonymize the two words. Like it might have similar explanations for types of platforms or type of systems, because it's giving you a general answer. But in an enterprise, you have a lexicon, and systems might mean very specific things and platforms might mean very specific things. And so the ability to provide that context to generative AI, that hey, in my business context, um, certain financial terms mean something, certain technical teams terms mean something. This is our knowledge base. This is our lexicon of business terms. That is super important to get answers that are accurate, relevant, precise for your business, right? And so to me, that's like the second pillar of like reliability is like what we call grounding, right? Grounding of LLMs.
Right. So in that case, what the grounding is doing is it's has this rich texture and landscape of the context and relevancy of your business, and it is answering in a way that's very targeted for your business as opposed to generally for like all of the same types of businesses. And that's an important distinction around the reliability. Okay, so I get that now.
Yeah, and imagine like it's like in the AI agent world, right? It's like just like a human, right? You hire someone who's a data scientist out of college, they're very good at data science concepts. But when we hire them at Rapid Canvas, we train them in the Rapid Canvas process and the Rapid Canvas platform, and Rapid Canvas, how we interact with clients and how we do things in teams. Without that context, you may not be able to function very well at Rapid Canvas, right? And AI is the same way, right? Hey, it's a it's a very smart, the LLMs, right? They're very smart with general knowledge, but in your context, you need to give them the training and the understanding of how to deal with situations, right? So, that's important. Uh, Third is the consistency, and this may mean this also has a couple of different angles to it, right? Uh, we hear this from people all the time, like, "Hey, LLM, I asked the same question 10 times, I get like 10 different answers," and which is fine when you're asking it to generate an email or write a report. Uh, but when you're asking it for data analysis and things like that, you want the same answer 10 times when you know that there's a right way to get to the answer. And so consistently getting the answer that you expect in these situations is very important, right? So from a generative AI LLM standpoint, that consistency, knowing that the answer you expect is the answer you get is important. Secondly, from a traditional machine learning standpoint, you build a model, the model performs really well when you build it. Over time, it sort of deteriorates because data changes, environment changes, all of that. Uh, and how do you make sure that the model can be constantly monitored and like tracked back to what is ideal performance? There is a second type of consistency. It's like, hey, on day one, if it was 95% accurate, in year three, how can I be sure that it's still 95% accurate? So the mechanisms to monitor it, the mechanisms to like correct it when it starts, when it sees drift, those are very important, right? So there are these two elements of sort of consistency. One is uh, the expected response, and then the second one is like performance, maintaining the performance over time. Um, the fourth pillar is more relevant in the generative AI world, where you're sharing information with an LLM to get a response back. And a lot of times you're sharing confidential information, information that is very sensitive. And you're like, well, will this show up somewhere? Will it be used to train the model? Like when somebody else asks a question about this kind of information, will it appear in the response? Um, and there is no clear answer to this, right? A lot of folks are kind of anxious about this. So one of the ways to solve it is like uh, you can put a layer in between the way you're using LLMs and what gets sent to the LLMs, and the fact that even if you send some information to the LLMs, that you have a contract where that information is discarded after that query is uh, responded to, right? So this concept of how do you protect your information, sensitive information, confidential information, not let it be out there because it was shared with a large language model. I think that becomes important. That's like, at Rapid Canvas, we have very, very sophisticated ways of dealing with this and ensuring that a client's information does not leave their environment, no matter what, even if it is used for the purposes of LLM. Um, but we hear this again and again and again from people like, hey, I just don't trust using LLMs in my enterprise context for this reason. And the last one with reliability is just enterprise grade. It means many different things like authentication, compliance and security standards like SOC 2 and GDPR, just everything that you need to function in a Fortune 500 enterprise, right? Scale, security, um, all the things around authentication, and that's like the fifth pillar. So I think these are sort of, when we hear about reliability from our clients, from our prospects, like these are the things that are top of mind for them.
Excellent. And that makes a lot of sense, that an implementation that really is going to be successful, not just on the go live, but over the long haul, that it has that type of AI sustainable reliability built into the AI. So that makes complete sense. So tell us a little bit about AI hallucinations. They get a lot of press coverage. And you argue that reliability encompasses much more than just accuracy. Can you walk us through what true AI reliability looks like beyond avoiding those false positive outputs?
Yeah. So, let me specifically talk about the hallucination aspect, right?
Yep.
Um, Now, if you consider a large language model, let's assume for the purpose of like conceptually what it does, right? It's read the whole internet and it has all these concepts. And when you ask it a question, it it kind of gives you a response in the context of like the concepts it's learned. So it might have read a Wikipedia page somewhere, and that's what it prioritizes as the context for whatever question you asked. Or it may have read some threads on Reddit and so on and so forth. Um, and there is no way you can um, sort of control that context, right? When the LLM has learned. And so this is what people call hallucinations, right? So the LLM is trying to give you a response back for your question, and it is relying on the context, right? And a lot of people say on the internet, like there's just a lot of um, low quality content, or just a lot of people having opinions, and they may not truly be facts, right? And then this is learning from it. So I don't think that's going to change. We have to assume that that's how the LLMs are going to learn. That's the kind of information that they're going to be exposed to. So then how do we sort of accommodate that when we work with our clients in an enterprise context, right? How do you accommodate the fact that yes, the LLMs are going to hallucinate? How do we balance that, or how do we counterbalance that, right? Couple of ways we think about it. One is what I mentioned in the previous response, is grounding, right? The more context that you can give that is relevant to your enterprise and prioritize as the context that the LLM should reference first, the more likely you're going to get an answer that is more relevant to you, right? So that grounding really helps. Second thing is like, what people call like prompt enhancement. So you take the prompt, like your answer is only as good as the question you ask. So if you ask a very open-ended question, there is a lot of room for interpretation. So the more precise your question can be, and sometimes uh, it's not um, like the person asking the question may not be able to frame it in the full context. So
Mm-hmm.
as a platform, how do you provide the surrounding context? Like, so if somebody asks a one-line question, how do you add another 50 lines to make that question more and more precise and tight, right? That becomes an important part of reducing hallucinations, because the more specific and targeted the question is, the more likely you're going to get a response that is very pertinent and precise. Um, so the first, like I said, is grounding. The second, which is how do you enhance the prompt, and the third is um, the explainability. So every time um, we provide a response on any kind of data queries for our clients, the underlying logic block is available. So you have the understanding of the whole logic. Did it multiply two columns, or did it add two columns? And did it like take the minimum, or did it take the maximum? Like all that logic is available for you to know exactly what happened. And that explainability is the third way in which um, you can get over your anxiety about hallucinations. It's not like it solves the hallucinations, but like, because you know what's going on, you're more likely to feel you got the answer you wanted, you know why it is what it is. And if you didn't get what you wanted, then you reprompt. But the explainability goes a long way in ensuring you're happy with the response.
Excellent. That leads into black box is a term that's used a lot in AI and in machine learning. And can you tell us why explainable AI is so crucial for the business, especially when it comes to trust and regulatory compliance?
Yeah, I mean, of course, like, as humans, we want to know why always. So there is like just that
The
basic,
inquiring minds.
yeah, the basic need, like, okay, you're telling me that my sales is going to increase like 50% next quarter. Great answer. But why? And like, how do we make it happen, right? Like, unless you know all these details, you're like, that data point is meaningless for me. So for sure, just to run business and just to trust the response, you need to know the why. But then also you add on additional requirements like regulatory requirements. If you're making a medical diagnosis, if you're evaluating credit, if you're making some life-changing decision, right, in a for example, in a car, to like brake or not brake, like, the more you know why, the logic that went into coming up with the decision, the better it is. Because you don't want a black box, in these situations. And this is where I think the more and more, like in financial services, healthcare, right, where there is regulations involved, there are more rules around what is and isn't acceptable. And a lot of these rules have to do with transparency, governance, and explainability, right? So, of course, like in industries that are more regulated, it's more important, but doesn't mean like where they're not regulated, it's less important.
And
Um,
they're all going to wind up becoming regulated at some point, and there'll be disparate multiple rules around it, right? Like what they like, just like with GDPR, right? The rules that are in place in Europe, in the US, of course, we couldn't adopt them fully. We had to make adjustments, right? So that becomes even more complicated to try and manage all of that when you have an enterprise that's like a global enterprise or is deploying AI globally, that they have to conform to all those different rules and regulations.
Absolutely. I mean, the big thing here is like not adding more overhead. So you don't need another governance team to like monitor what's going on here. Like if transparency and explainability is part of the process, right?
Yep.
Great. Because imagine now we have to build up another team that just is responsible for governance of what team A did with the data and the models. Well, if there is an inherent way in which you can track things well, in which things are more explainable, and things which can be reported correctly, alerted correctly, that just makes life easier to meet those requirements, right? Which is where ideally we should be, right? Not create unnecessary overhead
Yep.
for our clients in making that possible.
Excellent. So that, as a business leader, right, the more that like Rapid Canvas empowers business leaders to take on the responsibility of AI themselves, that then puts the responsibility of AI reliability on that business leader. So how do they do that without becoming a data scientist themselves? And what should they be looking for when they're evaluating AI for reliability?
Good question, right? And the more the business leaders can have the business lens and the less technical lens, the better, right? Okay, if I'm going to use AI, um, this is the kind of ROI I expect, or what is a good decision, right? For example, in inventory management, right? Like, um, am I am I going to stock out, or am I going to have over inventory? And how do I sort of track that, right? Like, starting to ask these basic questions around the business goals, business outcome, business process, is super important to eventually figure out, okay, if I'm trying to meet these goals, if I'm trying to meet this performance, like every day I need my inventory to be within 5% or 10% of whatever is just in time, right? And then that drives okay, how do I track that, and how do I provide you the information and the transparency to be able to know what's going on and why it's going on, and so on and so forth, right? And we see that a lot with business leaders, right? This is where starting with the business requirements, outcomes, framework first is sort of super helpful.
Excellent. Thank you for your time today, Raul. This has been fabulous as usual. I always love our interactions and chatting with you. So thank you for sharing your thoughts about AI reliability today.
Perfect. Thanks, Michele. Have a good day.
You too. Bye now.
Bye.